Well, hey friends, and welcome back to another pottery template tutorial. So today we are making this extremely adorable milk jug. I love this shape and it goes along really well with our most recent sugar bowl template. So first you want to tape together the two sides of MJ1. This is going to be part of the body of the milk jug. And then go ahead and roll out a 1/2 centimeter slab. I recommend going a little bit thicker with the handle, so I'm going to suggest that you use a 1 centimeter slab for the milk jug handle. Okay, you can set those pieces aside and roll out the 1 centimeter slab. Okay, now I recommend letting your template pieces dry out just a little bit so they're not so floppy. So a few minutes in front of the fan or just sitting out for maybe a 1/2 hour to firm up a little bit, that will be just fine. Okay, so we're going to start assembling the body of the milk jug. So we're starting with MJ1 here, and you want to cut the straight ends at a 45-degree angle so you can overlap them when you connect them. So you want to slip and score and press them together. Okay, I'm going to be repeating that with MJ2. This is the other part of the body. So cut each side at a 45-degree angle, slip and score, and press together firmly. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and attach these two parts together. Now this is the trickiest attachment of the whole piece, so just take it slow. You want to score each side and then line them up and make sure they're really well aligned before you start pressing them together. And then you just want to work those two sides together. So as Bianca's doing here, pressing the two sides into each other. You can use your fingers for this or you can use a rib, whatever makes most sense to you. Just get them really well attached and then you can go back in with a rib or your finger later on to tidy up that seam. And don't forget to tidy up the inside as well, since we're going to be using this with food. You want to not leave any cracks or crevices for any bacteria to build up. So I recommend using a wet paintbrush to smooth out the inside. Okay, hard part over. The body of our template has been assembled. So now we want to attach it at the bottom. So just go ahead and mark where it's going to sit. You'll notice that the bottom is a little bit bigger than it has to be. This is always the same with my templates. This is so that you can attach first and then trim to the perfect size. So you want to slip and score both sides and then press firmly together. Once they're well attached, you can go ahead and trim off the excess and blend in the seam. Okay, we're going to be moving on to the spout now. So the easiest way to attach the spout is cut both of the long ends at a 45-degree angle. This is going to give you a really smooth connection. So those two long ends you can see where Bianca's cutting right now. And then you want to mark where they're attached. So Bianca's showing a really nice trick here where you slip and score one side and then you can just hold it up against the side of your pot and the slip will leave a mark where you want to slip and score that side. And before you attach it, I do recommend cutting out the part of the wall that is blocking the spout. It's going to be really hard to get into that narrow space after you attach the spout, so I do recommend doing that ahead of time. And then you just want to smooth it in. Sponge on a stick always helps. Okay, we're moving on to the handle now. So you can smooth out the edges of the handle before you start shaping it. This is really easily done with a sponge here. And then you can use the handle shaping guide to shape your handle. So this is if you want to do the handle in the classic way. This is just a suggestion. Of course, you can do whatever crazy thing you want to do with your handle. You can customize it to whatever you want to make. But if you want to make that classic arched handle, you want to use the handle shaping guide. And make sure you cut each end of the handle at a 45-degree angle so that it matches up to the side of the creamer. And as always, slip and score to attach. once your handle is well attached, you can smooth it in with your fingers or a rib. I definitely recommend using a sponge on a stick or a wet paintbrush to kind of get into the crevices and smooth everything out really nicely. Okay, that means our milk jug is complete. Now all we need to do is let it dry out. We're going to fire it once in the bisque kiln once it's bone dry. And then, as usual, we're going to put on a beautiful, simple white glaze. Wipe off the bottom, and we can pop it back into the kiln. And here is the final result. I'm so freaking tickled by this cute little milk jug. I just find it so cute. And with this template, I actually think this would be a great project to scale up. You could actually scale up this template to be, you know, a proper jug if you want to. It's a super versatile template. I think he's extra cute. I love tiny things. And I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll see you next month with a new one. Bye, friends. Hey friends, I am very excited to share with you my new pottery template today. This is going to be the storage jar, another template in my kitchen collection that I'm working on right now, and it's a place where you can store all of your goodies, not limited to the kitchen. So first thing you want to do, of course, is cut out all the templates, and then you do need to paste K19 together with some tape. So we're going to be rolling out two different slab thicknesses here. Firstly, I want to roll out a 1/2 centimeter slab. This is going to be the main body of the project. So you want to use this 1/2 centimeter slab for the templates K19, K21, and K9. And then I'll use these scraps to roll out a 1 centimeter slab. You want to make sure you wedge it if you're going to be using your scraps here. Now this piece wasn't quite big enough to fit both of the other templates, but theoretically you should do K22 and K20 on this 1 centimeter slab. So I just cut one out and then I used the scraps again to cut out the other piece. Once everything's cut out, I like to put everything in front of the fan for a little bit to firm up. If you've seen any other of my template tutorials, you know that I like to do this because then the pieces become a little bit more firm, they're easier to work with and less floppy. So I'm going to start with the body of the template. I like to cut my edges at a 45-degree angle, and I'm going to score both sides as well so I can attach these two sides together. You don't need to worry about your seam being perfect just now. The main idea is to get it stuck quite well, and we can always go back later, again, when the piece is leather hard, to clean it up. And don't forget the inside. Okay, now we're going to attach the base. So there's a lot of circles going on here. Just make sure you have the right piece. This is the 21 template. And you'll notice the base is a little bit bigger than the actual bottom of the jar. This is the same for all the bases of all my templates. I make them this way so that you can attach it first and then cut it later. So you want to score each side and make sure it's attached really well. And once it's attached, then you'll want to cut it to size and blend. Now, in case you had any extra scoring marks like I did on the inside here, you can use a paintbrush with some water to just smooth out those extra lines. Okay, now we're going to set that aside and we're going to work on the lid. So basically the lid is just two thickish pieces of clay stacked on top of each other. I wanted to make the lid 1 centimeter thick to kind of give it a little bit more weight. I really like when my lids are a bit beefy. So just mark where it's going to sit. Make sure it's nice and centered and mark where it's going to sit. And then what we're going to do is score all of the parts where it's going to be attached. So it's going to be a lot of scoring here. And then now I want you to pay attention here because we want to be sure to not trap any air bubbles here. So can you see what I'm doing with my finger? I'm kind of going in a spiral from the center, pressing down, 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 trying to push out all of the air to the outside. So the middle is attached first and then out and out and out. That is the goal. So it sticks really well and doesn't trap any air. And then once again, if you need to clean up any edges, I usually do with a paintbrush and a little bit of water. Okay, now let's work on the handle. So that's this little piece right here, and I like to use a marker. I found this one marker works really well. It's about 1.5 centimeters in diameter, but whatever you can find that feels like the right height. It really helps to use something here to shape it nice and evenly. Now we're simply just going to attach it to the lid. The only tricky part here is you want to be very gentle with the handle. Make sure when you're sticking it down, you're not distorting it or anything. Score both sides and attach. I also added a little bit of water to the handle. This just depends on your clay if you need to add water or slip here. If the clay is nice and moist, you don't usually need to, but because this is the last part I was doing that day, the handle had dried out a little bit in the meantime. Ta-da! And I think the proportions on this jar are just so nice. I really like it with a thicker lid. So I'm going to let these guys firm up overnight under a bit of cloth until they're leather hard. This way I can come back in tomorrow and clean everything up. So tidying things up always takes the longest. I just tell people, just tidy up to the point that you're happy with it. Look for any little squiggly bits that might become sharp later on. Look for any, scratches. Sometimes you nick it with your fingernail. Anything that you don't like, this is your time when it's leather hard to tidy things up. Once they're looking good, you just set them to dry, and I usually let mine dry about a week. Okay, now we are loading up the bisque kiln. And I'm dipping them in some white glaze. Now don't forget to wipe your bottoms. We're not going to fire these glazed pieces together, so you want to wipe the bottoms of the jar and the bottoms of the lid so they don't stick to your kiln shelves. Okay, and here's how they turned out. So as you can see, I made 2 different sizes of jar. I don't know if you know this about my templates, but they work at pretty much any size. You can infinitely size them up or down to make whatever size piece you want. So the largest jar is the standard, that's the 100%. And then I did the other 2 jars at 80% and 90% scale. So this is something that you can just change in your printer settings. I think these jars look just so cute. I love the way that the food pops against the white, but I think they would also look so lovely in some bright colors as well. I'm so excited to see what you guys make with these templates, so make sure you tag me on Instagram at Pottery to the People so I can see your projects. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you have any questions down below. The template is also available down below, so go check it out, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Bye, friends. Hey friends, and welcome back to another pottery tutorial. This is a very special tutorial because my friend Bianca is making the pot today. So Bianca is an incredible artist in her very own right, and you'll be seeing a lot more of her. So today we are making the toothbrush template. This is a great one for beginners. It's pretty straightforward and simple, so I think pretty much anyone can manage this one. So first you want to roll it a 1/2 centimeter slab, and we're going to use this to cut out all of the templates. So we're going to cut out TH1 once and TH2 twice. That will be at the top and the bottom of the toothbrush holder. Okay, and then you want to firm up this clay a little bit. We like to put it in front of the fan for about 10 minutes, but you can also just wait maybe half an hour for them to firm out. Or if you're working with clay with a lot of grog, it might just be fine to work straight away. It just depends on how floppy your clay is. The floppier it is, the trickier it will be to work with. So first we're going to start with assembling the body of the cylinder. So you want to cut each of the short ends at a 45-degree angle. And then you want to score them and slip them if needed. And just overlap those 2 angles and press them together firmly. So you want to make sure when you're cutting your angles that you're flipping the rectangle halfway in between so that these 2 angles overlap and form that perfect seam. And don't forget to blend the inside as well. So first we're going to start with attaching one of the circles to the end of the cylinder. So you want to place your cylinder on top of the circle and trace around where it should attach. The circles in my templates are always going to be a little bit bigger than what you're attaching them to because it's easier to make a perfectly straight line if you attach first and then trim to size. So you want to attach it and then go ahead with your needle tool or a little knife, just trim it to size. And then blend the base into the walls of your toothbrush holder. This is going to make that seam really strong and hopefully disappear. Okay, and then we're going to repeat that for the second circle. Now, if you don't want a base on the bottom of your toothbrush holder, you can leave off one of these circles. It will absolutely hold up your toothbrushes regardless if you want the toothbrush to drain and to make it easier to clean. Alternatively, if you do want it to drain but you want a little bit more stability there, you can attach the base and then come back in and cut a smaller hole out later. It's absolutely up to you if you want it to drain onto your sink, or if you have it on a shelf or something, you might not want it to drain out. So it's really up to you and your circumstances in your bathroom. One thing you do want to do, however, is let your toothbrush holder dry out a little bit before you cut those holes out, because you're going to get a much cleaner line. It's going to be a lot easier if you're working with a leather hard piece. So either pop it in front of the fan like Bianca just did, or you can let it dry out for a few hours or even overnight. Next step is to select how many holes you want in your toothbrush holder, depending on how many toothbrushes you got going on in your household. And then cut out that template and you can use it on top like Bianca is here to trace out those holes. Now you can use either a hole cutter if you have one. Hole cutters are really great. Otherwise you could just use a sharp knife or your needle tool to cut out these holes. And then just smooth it out until you're happy with it. And when you're cutting out your holes, I do recommend checking the size of your toothbrush because not all toothbrushes are the same size. These holes worked for our toothbrushes that we checked, but keep in mind they will end up being about 1.5 centimeters, assuming a 10% shrinkage and printing at 100% scale. So check your toothbrushes to make sure they fit 1.5 centimeters in diameter. And your toothbrush holder is finished. So we're going to just let it dry out now until we're ready to put it in the kiln. And here is the final result of our toothbrush holder. I love this project because it's a really simple, beginner-friendly project, and it's quite cute, and it's going to add a really cute feature to any bathroom. So please send your love to Bianca down below in the comments. She did such a great job with this tutorial. Her toothbrush cup is incredibly cute, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye, friends. Hey friends, and welcome back to another pottery template tutorial. Today we are making this super cute sugar bowl. So first I want you to cut out all the templates, and you're going to have to tape together the two sides of SB2 because that piece was just too long enough to put on a piece of paper. Okay, once you have that taped together, now go ahead and roll out a 1/2 centimeter slab. We're going to use this slab for most of our templates, with the one exception of the spoon template. That one we're going to make a little bit thicker. So go ahead and cut them out, and you can set the pieces aside for now. Now we're going to use our scraps to roll out a 1 centimeter template. This piece doesn't need to be very big. We're just going to be using it to roll out the spoon. So that's SB6, which is the sugar bowl spoon. And you can make this thinner if you want. You can cut this out with 1/2 centimeter slab too if you want, but I personally like to make my spoon a little bit thicker just because then it doesn't feel quite as delicate when I'm using it. Okay, we're gonna pop those in front of the fan for a few minutes so they're not so floppy. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start assembling the sides. So Bianca is starting here with SB2, and you want to cut each end at a 45-degree angle. If you have this angle cutter tool, that's really great, but you can also just use a knife, and you want to slip and score those two sides together. Once it's nice and well attached, you want to move on to the other part, which is SB1. So we're going to assemble these two sides, and then we're going to put them together. Okay, now it's time to put these two sides together. Now, I would say this is the trickiest part of this template because it is always hard to put together two angle joints that are kind of like butted up against each other. But just take it slow, and if you find that your piece is starting to collapse, I would recommend putting it back in front of the fan for a few minutes, or just setting it aside if you don't have a fan. They should be well dry enough now to hold their own weight so that you can work on that seam and smooth it in. Now Bianca's using her finger here. I also really like to use a rib to kind of smooth those in together. And if you're not feeling too confident with that seam, you can always add a coil along the inside to reinforce that seam. Okay, now it's time to add the bottom, and please make sure you're grabbing the right circle here because they're slightly different sizes. So you want to be grabbing the SB4 sugar bowl base circle, not the lid. You want to go ahead and mark where you need to score and score both sides. So you'll notice that the base is a little bit bigger than it needs to be. All my templates are like this. This is so that you can attach first and then trim. This way you get the cleanest cut. Once you stick them together, give it a few taps or drop it on the table lightly, just to make sure it's really nicely attached together. And once it's well attached, go ahead and trim off the excess and smoothen the base. You can also use a slightly wet paintbrush on the inside to smooth out any extra scoring lines. Okay, now it's time to work on the lid. So we're going to start with the flange. So as you're working with and smoothing out the flange, it's possible that it can get a little stretched out. So just as you're attaching the two ends of it together, please double check that it's fitting inside of the opening of your sugar bowl. You want it sitting just inside of the opening with, a millimeter or two of a gap. And you might need to adjust the length if you are butting up the ends against each other like Bianca's doing here, versus if you are cutting them at a 45-degree angle and overlapping them. So just before you attach the flange together, just verify that it's going to fit inside your sugar bowl opening. Once you know it fits, go ahead and attach it to the lid of your sugar bowl. Try and center this as much as possible. It's a little tricky because everything's a little wonky when you're hand building, but do your best and I'm sure it will be just fine. And a sponge on a stick is a really helpful tool in this scenario. Big recommend. Bianca actually turned me on to sponges on a stick. Okay, now we're going to work on the lid handle. So you just want to bend this little piece here. Please, because it's so small, be aware that it might crack as you're bending it, depending on how dry it is. So just watch that as you're bending it, and you can always use your finger to smooth it out again. And then you want to slip and score both sides where it's going to go and just attach it. Okay, moving on to our spoon. So our spoon, basically all you want to do is smooth out the edges and then kind of manipulate it with your hands to get it into that spoon shape. So just like Bianca's doing here, you can use your thumb or your finger to kind of get that shape to be curved a little bit. This is going to hold the sugar a lot better. All right, we're in the final stretch here. We are going to use the sugar bowl hole guide. Now, this is totally optional, but if you want to cut out a slot for your spoon to stick in, I definitely recommend using this hole guide. So you can use that template to trace through a hole onto your sugar bowl. This will be the perfect size for a 1 centimeter thick spoon to fit in, and then just cut off that piece. And as you can see here, you also need to cut through the flange as well. It's a little tricky to keep things nice and tidy here, but just do the best that you can, and you can always use a sponge on a stick to smooth it out. Okay, now we're done with our sugar bowl, so now we're just going to set it aside to dry. Once it's bone dry, you can pop it in the kiln for the bisque fire. It's looking so cute. Pick your favorite glaze. We're using a simple white here. And then wipe off the bottoms as needed. So I do recommend firing everything separately. So you're going to need to wipe the base of the sugar bowl, the base of the lid, so the part of the lid that will be touching the kiln shelf. And then depending on how you want to fire your spoon, you either need to remove some glaze for kiln stilts like Bianca is doing here, or you can remove all of the glaze on the bottom if you don't have kiln stilts, whatever you prefer. As long as you're using a stoneware clay or another vitrified clay, it will be perfectly food safe, even unglazed. All right, our sugar bowl is completed, and I'm so obsessed with this design. I think it looks so cute. I love the squat little shape that it has. I think that it will look so nice on any table or any tea set. In your kitchen, anywhere, this little cutie will look so adorable, and you can even use it for a jar if you want to. So I hope that you enjoyed this template tutorial. I hope that you enjoyed the template. As always, the template will be linked down below in the video description, and I'll see you in a month with the next template. Bye, friends. Hey friends, and welcome back to another pottery template tutorial. Today, Bianca is going to be showing us how to make the jug. So first, you just want to cut out all the templates along the dotted line and tape together the 3 parts of JU1. So this is going to be the main body of the template. I will classify this template as an intermediate template simply because it's a little bit bigger than my other templates, and simply when you're working with bigger slabs, it's always a little bit harder. But if you're a beginner, give it a go and let me know how it goes. So first step, we're going to be rolling out a 1/2 centimeter slab, and this is for most of the jug. We're going to be cutting out JU1, JU3, and JU4, so everything but the handle. But since the template pieces are so big here, feel free to roll them out separately, just like Bianca's doing here. Okay, and then we want to set those pieces aside, and we're going to be rolling out a 1 centimeter slab for the handle. That's JU2. Okay, now I recommend letting your pieces dry out a little bit. This will make them easier to handle, especially when working with larger slabs. So what you can do is put them in front of the fan for a few minutes. I usually go for about 10 minutes in front of the fan, or you can wait for a half an hour to let them dry out a little bit naturally. It's completely up to you, and it also depends on the humidity in your studio. So you want them to be less floppy at this stage. So when you're handling the large slab, it's not going to collapse in on itself. Now that our slab pieces have dried out a little bit, we're going to start with the body of the jug. So what we want to do is cut the two straight ends at a 45-degree angle. This will create an overlap that will hopefully create an invisible seam. So you want to score along those lines, and since our piece is a little bit dried out now, we want to add some water or some slip and then press these together as well as you can. Don't worry about making it perfect at this stage. We basically just want to get them together and smooth it out, create a really strong bond here, and we can always go back in and smooth out any seams when it's a little bit more stable. Okay, now it's time to add the bottom. So we're going to be using the round piece, JU4. And the bottoms of my templates are always a little bit bigger than they need to be. That's because for creating the nicest seam, we want to attach first and then trim to size. So you want to set the jug body on top of JU4 and mark where you want to attach. And then you can go in and slip and score and attach them together firmly. Once they're attached, then you want to trim to size and blend the two pieces together. Okay, our next step is to work on the spout. So we're going to be using JU3, and you can see exactly marked on the template where you should cut a 45-degree angle. This will create a more smooth transition between the spout and the body of the jug. So I do recommend cutting at a 45-degree angle. Whether you have this angle cutter tool or not, you can always cut with a needle tool or a knife instead. And then you want to mark on your jug where you will attach the spout. And slip and score that area, as well as the spout itself. And if you notice any cracking along where you bent the spout shape, this is definitely possible since it's a smaller piece, so it will dry out a little bit faster. If the cracking is minor, you can just use your finger like Bianca is doing to smooth out those cracks. If the cracking is more severe, however, that probably means that your spout is dried out a little bit too much. In that case, I would say just roll it another piece and cut it out again, and skip the drying process for this new spout. Okay, so before you attach the spout, I do recommend cutting out the cutout part that's going to let the water flow into the spout. This is going to be much easier to do now before you attach the spout than later on. And then you just simply want to blend it in. If it's being a little difficult to blend, you can use a sponge to add a little bit of water to really blend that spout into the body of the pot. The smoother you make it now, the more refined it will look in the end. And then as you can see, Bianca is using a bit of water on her finger to kind of round out the end of that spout. Doing this is going to make a much more smooth and less choppy of a pour. So I definitely recommend just rounding the edge of that spout a little bit with some water. Okay, now we're going to move on to attaching the handle. So you want to go ahead and shape the handle and cut each end at a 45-degree angle. You can cut each end either before you shape it or after you shape it, completely up to you. And slip and score as usual. You want to make sure you're slipping and scoring both sides on the handle and where the handle will attach, and then press in firmly. What Bianca's doing here with the ruler is just making sure that the handle is actually opposite of the spout. It's deceptively tricky to make sure that the spout and handle are at perfect opposites of each other. So just have an overview, line everything up, and do the best you can. Okay, final touches. We're just checking to make sure the top is nice and round, the handle is a good shape, and then we're ready to let it dry out. Once the piece is bone dry, we're going to load it into the kiln for the first firing, the bisque firing. And here is our final result. Now we have a really wonderful and generously sized pitcher or jug, however you want to call it, perfect for your summer afternoons for some lemonade or just some water. You can also put some flowers in and use it as a very practical vase. Completely up to you. I hope that you enjoyed this template. Thank you so much to Bianca for demonstrating that for us, and I'll see you again next month with a new template. Bye, friends. Hey friends, and welcome back to another pottery tutorial. Today we are doing a wonderful beginner project. This is the soap dish. So first you want to cut out all your templates. We have SD1, which is the body of the soap dish. We have SD2, which will be the 2 feet. And then there's also a foot guide attached. So you want to cut them all out along the dotted lines. Then we're going to be rolling a 1/2 centimeter slab, and you want to cut out SD1 once and SD2 twice. Next, I recommend you put them in front of the fan for a little bit, or you can, if you don't have a fan, just let them sit out and dry out a little bit. This will make the next steps easier because your clay won't be quite so floppy. And you can take some time right now to tidy up your slab pieces. This will make it easier to smooth things out later on if you're working with nice smooth pieces from the beginning. Okay, now you want to use your soap dish foot guide to bend the feet, and you could shape these feet however you want, but if you want them to look like they are in the project tutorial and all the photos, you can use this guide. And if your soap dish feet start cracking a little bit, that's totally fine. Just use your finger to smooth those out. If they're really, really deep cracks, it's possible that your clay is a little bit too dried out. So I would recommend in that case just cutting out new feet there. But little cracks can just be smoothed out. Next, you want to transfer the feet to your soap dish so that you can mark where they're going to be attached. And then slip and score. And if you have any extra scoring lines, you can use a paintbrush or a sponge to clean those up. It's going to be a lot easier to clean those up now during this step. Okay, now we want to shape the soap dish a little bit so that your soap stays nicely in the dish and doesn't flop off the edge. So we're going to be slowly shaping and pulling up the edges and pushing down the inside. We want a nice soft curve to our soap dish. And once your soap dish has a nice soft angle, we're going to be cutting out a few holes here. Now, you don't have to cut out holes. Some people don't like it when their soap drips onto their counter. It just depends if your counter is like part of the sink or not. It's completely up to you. You don't have to add the holes. But I do recommend them if you are going to be putting your soap dish on your sink, because then your soap will last a heck of a lot longer. And then our soap dish is all finished, so you can go ahead and let it dry out. Once it's bone dry, we're gonna pop it into the kiln for the first firing. And then we're gonna put a simple white glaze on it. Bianca has these incredibly cool tongs. You absolutely don't need these tongs. You can just use normal glazing tongs or even just your fingers to dip them into the glaze. Wipe off the bottom where the glaze is going to touch your kiln shelf and pop it back into the kiln. And here is our final result. I think the soap dish is just so adorably cute. It's a simple soap dish that can match pretty much anyone's bathroom style, and I even have it in my very own bathroom at home. Alright friends, I hope that you enjoyed that tutorial. I'll see you next month with a new one. Bye friends.